solved, but not closed. That's the word from officials looking into the 2001 anthrax attacks, 8 days after the FBI's top suspect committed suicide.
A Florida man has contracted a very rare and potentially deadly form of anthrax.
Rare inhaled form of anthrax. Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson calls it an isolated case and says there was no threat of terrorism.
This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great. President Bush tries reassuring the nation after anthrax is found at a facility that handles mail going to the White House.
What is going on, guys? Just a quick reminder before getting this episode started. This is a two-part series. So if you haven't seen part one yet, click the link right here. And with that, let's get the episode started.
Yeah, it's a running joke in DC too for even people say with like the dating scene is that nobody's like everyone's not two-faced, but just never shows their real stuff.
Oh, like politics.
Yeah.
Politics in DC, it's a tough business.
Yeah, it's like Los Angeles, everyone's trying to get famous, and then here everyone's trying to become a politician.
Oh,
so
sure. But you want power and you want to be next to power, right? So so that was kind of what was happening, which kind of made it difficult. But once we convinced them that okay, we're not going to touch these things, then they eventually allowed us to go over there and get Thamer.
And can I ask, how did that make you feel when you kind of came to that revelation? Did you feel worried? Did you feel pissed off? Like looking at people in high-level positions of power in the U.S. that, lack of a better word, are trying to save their own ass at times when, and we highlight this, you highlight this throughout the book, is like, if we're wrong about that, it's not going to cost 10 lives. It's not going to cost 20 lives. It could cost thousands of lives. It would make 9/11 look like just the beginning if we were wrong about this and if we ignored something like that. So how did you feel about it? Were you pissed? Were you worried? Like what was the feeling there?
Yeah, I was a little bit angry about that because I'm thinking, this is for the benefit of America, of our people, to protect them. Why wouldn't they want us to do this? I mean, so that went on in the back of our minds, but we were busy on trying to get the mission accomplished. So you kind of put that, you press that down, you push that aside, and you go on with the mission. But that was always there. Like, God, why are they doing this? But you could see that happened with COVID. I mean, all the information that came out since that, and people trying to protect their own agenda and certain things like that. So yeah, that went on back then. It's still going on right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, the COVID point's this is another example we were talking about at the top where we were talking about media, but politicians too. If you admit you're wrong, I feel like people would view you in such a better light. And I think maybe there's this narrative that politicians tend to believe where they think that if they're wrong, everyone's not going to want to vote for them. Historically, that might have been true, but I think there is a bit of an appetite by Americans for a politician to go up there and say, hey, I messed this up, and I understand that, but I want us to actually move forward in the right direction. And that's something that we just tend to not get. And, what we're talking about here in D.C. is that tends to be the way people play the game is they're just going to ignore the issue, not circle back and say, I messed that part up. But at the same time, I feel like if they did, people might appreciate that a lot more.
Yeah, wouldn't that be a breath of fresh air, right?
Yeah.
To have politicians say, I messed up and, I take responsibility and we're going to go forward from that. Yeah, it would be. But, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but it hasn't happened, didn't happen in this particular case. And I don't see much evidence of it today. So, politics is a vicious business and admitting mistakes is tough. And, it was here. I mean, obviously, President Bush, to my knowledge, has not come out and said, Iraq was a mistake.
Really?
To my knowledge, I haven't heard any speeches or anything in the public domain where he's come out and said, listen, this was totally a mistake. You can blame intelligence. You can blame all of this. I guess people can look at all the evidence and make their own determination. But yeah, it would be a breath of fresh air if we had politicians that would come out and do that. But
do you think there's a bit of too much bureaucracy in the intelligence community too that can lead to situations like this. Like I had a former intel officer, Kervin Alcoin Analytics, and we talked about this very early in the podcast. Essentially, cases like 9/11, we had intel of that being a possibility, but you have this arm over here say this thing, this arm over here say that thing, and there's just eventually too much paperwork gets shuffled around that who knows the truth. Do you think that there might be just a little too many cooks in the kitchen type of deal where, we'll have intelligence issues like this and all of a sudden it's multiple layers and that truth gets lost within that?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have about 23 agencies as part of the intel community within the government, so that's quite a few. You got CIA and DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then all of the FBI's got their efforts. So yeah, there's quite a bit of intelligence assets that we have, and yeah, you could have competing information coming up to the president. You could, and of course, a lot of intelligence is raw, and a lot of intelligence needs to be interpreted.
Yeah.
What does it mean? And you can interpret it the way you, in some instances, the way you want, and that does go on as well. So obviously we got it wrong. Is anybody going to come out and say, yeah, this is the reasons why, or any of that stuff? No, I haven't seen that. But yeah, the apparatus in our government can be so overwhelming that it can, you can have a conflict and you could have competing harms and agencies that are just not working in sync together. And in intel, that could be very, very, problematic.
Yeah, I've had former CIA, FBI, and they've all discussed how there's that brotherly love between the agencies at times for some of these circumstances as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You want to hold on to what you have, right? There's always that competing information, agencies that compete against each other. And I think I mentioned that in the book where, America's longest war is our turf war. And that's been going on, since the very beginning. And agencies fighting for jurisdictions, agencies fighting for, money, agencies fighting for prestige and, and all that kind of stuff. So, unfortunately, I've seen that in my career, over 20 years in the government. And I think it's gotten a little bit better after 9/11 because we recognize the need to communicate with each other and share information. Is it where it needs to be? In my opinion, no.
Yeah, it's we're definitely going to have to do another episode where we'll dive into the career before the whole book and everything, because obviously I was going to say that off the top today, too. We could probably be here for 10 hours just talking about everything, I'm sure. But going back to the story, like you said, there was a shift in perspective there. You realize that the way to approach this is basically tell them what they want to hear, and they're going to let you go. And it ended up working.
Yes.
You were able to get a trip to Iraq. So you put a team together, and you headed off to Iraq. Immediately, you're hit with more bureaucracy. So can you speak to that situation as well?
Oh, sure. One of the things that we needed to do, the first thing that they allowed us to do was to go over and get a proffer. And what a proffer basically is just a statement of information that this person has value. And so they weren't going to let us bring him back. They said, go get a proffer. So that was our goal the first time. But leading up to this, it was just, my main concern was, even if we were fortunate enough to find him, to bring him out of hiding, would he even want to talk with us? After all that he'd been through, would he want to cooperate, even if I was lucky enough to find him? So that was always a big concern. And of course, we were fighting, the clock, and we were fighting all of the assassinations that were going on at the time. So all that was happening. We got over there. We got over there, and one of the first things we wanted to do was just get some cooperation from our own side, from our embassy and from our people.
Yeah.
To allow us to do this, to help us to do it. And basically, we were pretty much left on our own. Yeah. So we didn't have a lot. We had some military cooperation, but pretty much it was an effort and a mission just for our team.
It feels like most people think it's like the movies where you guys have your own private jet. You get to fly your helicopter. They're going to bring you right to where you need to go. And then, you read it and you're like, that's not the situation at all. In fact, you find yourself on a plane with a 19-year-old Marine sitting next to you, heading on over. And that's the situation. That's how you're going to get into, at the time, the most dangerous city in the world.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Can you maybe speak to that plane flight too? I love that moment.
It was, so we had to go through all of the hurdles to be able to operate over there. We had to go to the Pentagon and get our CAC cards to allow us to operate in a military base and so forth. So we did all that prep work, and you're right. It wasn't a plane dedicated for us waiting at Andrews to take us over there. So they threw us, on a military plane and crammed in with a bunch of soldiers on the way over there. And many of them were my son's age at the time. And in the book, I mentioned that where one of the soldiers looked at me and said he admired me for being over here. And I was just totally taken aback. 'Cause what are you talking about? We hadn't even met. And he said, yeah, I admire you. I said, for what? He said, for being out here doing this thing at your age. So that was kind of like, okay, I guess it was a backhanded compliment. But yeah, so we pretty much crammed in there and just, subject to all of the things that happened, delays and trying to get on the airplane. And we wound up going to Kuwait first, and we had to sit there. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to get in there, which is not unexpected given, you've got a war going on. So
yeah, that's what I feel like most people immediately would think. Like I was saying, everything goes quick, smooth. You set up, you got a ticket, you go over, and there's so many different layers to get in it. But you guys eventually end up in Iraq, and you're lucky enough to circle around with the group and say, now it's time to give Thamer a phone call.
Yeah.
Can you look back on that moment, the feeling? For me personally, even just reading the book, I had a pit in my stomach. I felt like I was going to throw up or something. It was crazy. And, because you say this throughout the book, but you had built a connection with a guy you had never met. I think you did a fantastic job in the book building the connection for us as well. But the moment had finally arrived. You're going to speak with him on that phone. You're going to go and pick him up. Can you talk about that feeling in that moment with the guys around you sitting around that phone?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, so we finally get there, and now it's like, okay, this is game time, right? We gotta reach out to this guy and make this thing happen. And so a lot of things just go through your mind at the time. And naysayers back in Washington, was this worth the effort? You think about safety. I have to worry about keeping these guys safe and also keeping Thamer safe, to make sure nothing happens to him. So all of that's going on in your mind, and you're thinking to yourself, is it worth it? Does he have any information that we really need? Because, again, I wasn't totally read into everything at that particular time. So, you're just thinking about all these things. And I remember specifically, I gave Kevin, who was one of my teammates, the number, and it just kept taking him forever to dial this thing in. And I'm getting anxious. So we had some words going back and forth. And he basically said, hey, get off my back and let me just dial this number. And of course, he dialed it, and no answer. It kept ringing and ringing. So I'm thinking, he's dead. He doesn't want to cooperate. He's changed his mind. And all of this is for nothing. So, that was going through every ring. Just created a little bit more anxiety. But finally, the phone, he picked up, and I'm like, God, thank you, God. We finally got contact with him. So
he seemed very nervous on the phone too, which is very understandable. Mm-hmm. I mean, that first conversation, how did you feel too? You're speaking with him on the line, and suddenly it's kind of, you're realizing just how much this guy's, you knew before, but how much this guy had gone through. And you could tell from the tone that it was very worried, scared, unsure. So what were some of your thoughts with that as well?
Yeah, all of that went through my mind as well as his mind, because he just didn't know. At the time, we had learned that there was also a warrant for his arrest by the new Iraqi government. I didn't find out specifically what the charge was, but it could have been because of his relationship with the previous regime. And a lot of that was going on there, too. There was, the Shia were back in power now against the Sunnis, and a lot of people were arrested and picked up.
Was he a Shia? Or?
He was a Shia.
Okay, so he was still aligned.
So there was, but all of that was happening at the time, and of course, again, I didn't, I I can only imagine what was going on through his mind. Is this a trap? Are they going to want to just arrest me? So he just didn't know. And the only thing he had to base his experiences with is what had previously happened to him with the Americans, which, was pretty brutal. And then they promised him and they left him out there. So, yeah, he didn't have a lot of confidence, and he didn't know who we really were. So, yeah, that was definitely going on through his mind.
And eventually you guys were able to set up the meetup. And again, one of the parts of the book where you're thinking, oh shit, what's about to happen here? To go pick up Thamer, you guys have to travel on, at that point in time, the world's most dangerous road.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that moment as well, leaving out the gates from the base, knowing that the road that you're traveling on, it's a mix of happiness where you're obviously the target you've been looking for years now, you're finally about to come face to face with. At the same time, you're traveling the most dangerous road in the world.
Yeah, that was that was a big concern of ours because we didn't have the backing of a big military convoy or anything. It was just us in a couple of upper armored SUVs. They said they were armored. I don't know. They looked in pretty tough shape. So yeah, that was it. And I had there was the three of us. It was Jim Elseth, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, was on the team. Kevin Kelly, who was an HSI agent, and myself. But then when we got on the ground, we did enlist the help of some other federal agents that were there, permanently assigned in Iraq, or actually temporarily assigned in Iraq, to give us a hand, and they came and helped us out. But yeah, basically it was just a couple of armored vehicles, some M4 rifles, some ammo, a half-ass map, and
yeah,
and a guy that doesn't speak English that good. So yeah, so that's what happened. So yeah, we were concerned about taking a wrong turn, getting lost, and all of that stuff. And Rod Irish was pretty. It had gotten better by the time we made our trip, but it was still pretty bad road, and you just never knew what was going to happen there. I mean, a lot of IEDs. They call it IED Alley, and you get off the exits, and it was a lot of
What's it like driving down a road where? Because I've spoken to a lot of different veterans that have been in and out of that area, but I've never really asked this question. It's just kind of popping on my mind. What's it like driving down that road where there could be IEDs or insurgents setting up an ambush at any time? Like, what was the feeling in that moment?
Well, we were alert, obviously, watching for things that might be suspicious. But you don't want to get bogged down in that, because then you won't be successful. You'll just be, and that can cause you to make a mistake too. Just being, just overly. We had a mission, and we needed to, to find him and connect with him. So that was first and foremost on our mind. Yeah, were we concerned about, safety and things like that? Yes. But you just don't you don't dwell on that. You just kind of go forward. So we were careful, as careful as we could be with, our two armored vehicles. We had a plan. We were going to pretty much drive through any issues if it happened, and hopefully, there wouldn't be any ambush or anything like that, because those are tough, and obviously, we had the best plan that we could have at the time to keep us safe, and we executed that. And fortunately, on that first excursion out there, we didn't have any issues.
You talked about it a little bit too in the book, just when you're looking around at the faces, and we talked about the contractors a little bit at the beginning as well. Some of the violent circumstances that were happening at that time, or in the years prior in Iraq. Can you speak to that perspective as well? How you were feeling, how those different individuals were in your mind, and then also, I think this is probably very good for the listeners to hear as well, is how you were able to kind of push that off and be able to say, we need to focus back on the mission at hand.
Yes. Prior to my going over there, when I was in the Secret Service, I had received this email, and I opened it from a colleague, and it was the execution of one of our contractors. And it was pretty brutal. And it was a beheading, and it was because of what happened in Abu Ghraib prison, retaliation. And so he was a contractor that was from Pennsylvania, and was trying to, get a contract or get working on antennas, my recollection of it. And he was captured. And he was filmed, and they brutally decapitated him. And I remember watching the video, and it was truly disgusting to watch and really, horrific. And then they had the audio with it too, which was even worse. So yeah, was that on my mind? Sure, you didn't want to take a wrong turn and wind up with that because again, we didn't have any protection. It was just us. So that was kind of on my mind. But again, you don't want to dwell on it. You just want to try to stay as safe as possible. And of course, there was an earlier incident that happened in 2004 where there were other contractors that were ambushed. I think it was up towards Fallujah. They were escorting a truck up there, a supply truck of some sort, and they were ambushed and they were brutally killed. And their bodies were lit on fire, and then they were dragged out and hung on a bridge. So, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty brutal environment, and those things we were thinking about. But again, you're in a war zone. You try to be as safe as possible, but you push some of that stuff down, because you have a mission to carry out, and you just go forward with it.
What do you think is your mental steps to be able to push that down? I hope, no listener is ever in that type of circumstance where, they're going into a situation like that, but lessons like this in the most challenging times can be utilized even in, simple things, getting up and going to the gym, whatever it might be. You got to have that mental perspective on things. So what were the mental steps you took for that?
Well, it was, again, looking at, okay, this mission was about obtaining information that can help protect Americans. That was first and foremost. And so, nobody wants to die, right? But we, that was our focus. It was all about the mission, and we didn't dwell on it. In all my time in the Secret Service, you could be killed, stepping in front of a bullet. Yes, that's not possible, but you didn't dwell on it because you had a mission. You were so focused on protecting the president that you didn't even think about that. Sometimes once in a while when you're sitting there after all of the events are happening, you kind of think about that's always a possibility. But even prior to that, when I was a police officer, every time you leave, it's a possibility, right? So you just learn to live with that and know that that type of stuff is just part of what you signed on to do. So we didn't dwell on it too much. So I'm happy to say that we just focused on that mission, and that's what got us through.
So now we're finally coming face to face. There is actually, I want to save this for the reader. There is one situation that happens before you're able to interact with Thamer, but I'm going to save that for the reader so they can see that one in the book, because again, that was one of the moments where you're just sitting there like, oh shit, like what's about to happen. And especially with how you were highlighting there too, one wrong turn, who knows what happens.
Sure.
But you come face to face with Thamer, you quickly move him to the vehicle, and you have to take him towards base. And then an arrest warrant out for him by the new Iraqi government as well, so he was facing challenges from all angles. And there was some interaction there. So can you speak about bringing Thamer into base and how you just survived the deadliest stretch of road in the world, and suddenly your biggest challenge here is getting him onto base safely?
Yeah, that was a little bit of an issue that we had when we were coming back. But we quickly got him, and I just remember looking through the rearview mirror, and I just kind of repositioned it to see it back there. Is this really? I've been chasing this guy for 2 years now, and he's finally sitting in the back seat. So the thing I noticed immediately was his hair. It was gray in the picture that I had, but it had turned white. And, so I'm thinking to myself, God, we're finally face to face with a person I thought was a ghost, right? Because we just kept searching for this guy, and finally we got a hold of him. So, our main concern was to beat feet back to the base safely and get him through. And we had a little bit of encounter with some of the outer guards. But we were able to get past that and get him into this debriefing room, and that's where we first had my face-to-face contact with him.
How often were those issues with the Iraqi guards and stuff like that? I mean, you highlight that throughout the book, where even in the base there was always worries of one of the Iraqis switching allegiance, and there's cases where military members were killed because of this. How often was that an issue in Iraq? I mean, was that something that you guys were expecting when you were coming back? Was it a surprise, or was it kind of one of those things that you always had to account for?
Well, you always wanted to be careful because, again, there were a lot of attacks on base. Even the Green Zone, which is supposedly safe, had insider attacks and bombings and so forth. And so, yeah, you just never knew, who had been turned and who was truly, on the side of the Americans. So that was always an issue. And of course, the bases were filled with Iraqis. And there had been a lot of insider attacks. They had happened in Afghanistan. They happened in Iraq. And there was one incident where a suicide bomber was able to infiltrate one of our mess tents and killed a whole bunch of Americans when he ignited his suicide vest. So there was a lot of security internally on the bases. But yeah, there was always a concern because you just never knew. And, of course, the people on the outskirts to protect the bases, were Iraqis, and there was some other elements in there too. So you never knew, where their allegiance was. So it was always a concern.
Yeah, and Thamer was wanted by them too.
And he was wanted by them. And of course, if we lost him, that would be the end of that. He'd be gone, and maybe never, we'd never see him again. So we were concerned about, running into them and having any problems with getting him back on the base. So that was an issue, but we were fortunate enough to make it through.
So you're finally getting to have a conversation with this ghost you've been chasing for years and seeing him in the flesh and blood, and it's going to be the first time we're talking face to face. And you had a really interesting perspective in the book where it was kind of a recollection where you realized that you didn't really know if the guy was good or bad yet.
No.
You've been developing this friendship for years because actually caring about this guy's well-being, and then suddenly you realize kind of the moment of truth here. Like, who is this guy? And you have to spend the next couple hours having this discussion and really break down everything he's saying, making sure there's no lie, making sure you know where his allegiance is. So what were your thoughts in that moment?
They were definitely mixed. You focused on, getting that proffer, right? We needed to make sure that he had that information that we were looking for. So we were kind of focused on that. But, I had other feelings as well. I had gained some insight into what had happened to him by that time, and the imprisonment. He hadn't been charged, and the torture and all of that stuff that went on. So, I was sympathetic on one hand, but obviously, laser focused on getting this proffer, but also aware of the fact that, no, I didn't know if he was a good guy. Was he on our side? Was he, was he playing some kind of angle? Did he have an agenda just to cooperate with us but had an ulterior motive? I didn't know any of that because we hadn't had a chance to really communicate together. This would be the first time. Most of it was over the phone. All of that was doubtful because we were sticking our necks out, and we were going to be making this effort to eventually bring him to the United States. And if he was a bad guy, that would have been a serious issue. So yeah, I had to quickly measure him and make a determination as to whether he had an ulterior motive.
Can you talk about your interrogation techniques? Not technique sounds aggressive, but in terms of, most people, again, Hollywood loves to make interrogations look as simple as, good cop, bad cop, and the guy will get intimidated and he'll say everything, don't worry. But at the same time, there's also ones where, you'll see cartel movies where they have to torture the guy for him to say anything. And you kind of highlight very well through the book how that's not necessarily the case, but there's also methodologies in terms of what you're looking for, how you can kind of track what the person's saying and be able to identify, there's a lie there. So what are some of the interrogation techniques people really maybe don't understand, but you would utilize in kind of the day-to-day with that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Obviously the most important thing is building up a rapport so you can have that dialogue and communication, because if you don't have that, then it's difficult to measure anything, right?
Yeah.
So, but some of it is a person's physical appearances and some of the things that they do that can kind of give you, a feeling that, hey, he's not quite right here. Hesitation in answers that should come quickly because he's thinking about what he's going to say. Trying to make themselves more important than they really are to impress upon you that, look at me, I have all this information that you need. So there's just a whole bunch of different things that you would look for when you're trying to determine the veracity of a person. And much of it was, I didn't have a lot of time, so much of it was, we had questions that we needed to have answered, and he was, and he was pretty forthright about, looking directly at us, making eye contact, telling us if he didn't know something, he didn't try to make it up. He just said, I don't know, which is, again, goes to the veracity of a person as being truthful rather than someone trying to, con you and tell you they have all this information when they really don't. So we went through this entire process of just feeling each other out. And then we began to get into the technical stuff that we really needed to get from him in order to have this proffer. So that went on for hours, and at the end of that, I felt as comfortable as I could that he was being truthful with us, and I basically told him one lie, one misrepresentation, and we're out of here because we just have too much at stake here. We're not going to play these games. So I think he was well aware of how important it was, and I never got a sense of any type of deceptive behavior during our time together. And obviously that was something that we were looking for.
And do you think the one lie, I thought about that in my own perspective, where one lie or one misstep and conversation's over, and I was thinking about it, I was like, man, I would just mess up from just being nervous.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that seriousness of it helped Thamer really kind of put it together in terms of like how he had to have that conversation? Do you think the nerves were hitting him very hard? I mean, obviously it's such an intense conversation, but how do you think that kind of played in his mind and your own mind as well?
I didn't detect that he was overly nervous. Obviously you could see some apprehension. He just didn't know where this thing was going to go. Was he walking into a trap? Was he, did he really meet the people that could make the decisions that he needed, or it was just another effort that wasn't going to go anywhere? So, he had a lot of things on his mind, obviously. But I didn't detect that he was overly nervous about this. I think he realized the importance of it, and that he had to be completely upfront, or we were just going to leave. And so I made that clear at the very beginning. And then, then you go through all your protocol, and you're asking all of these different types of questions, and then you circle back to the questions you've already asked to see if his answer changes. So there's all kinds of different techniques that you could use. The truth never changes, right? But lies have a bunch of different fathers. So, we just employed those techniques. I did. I was doing that while Dustin was kind of concentrating on the actual technical information. He was a microbiologist that we had brought with us to determine the technical part of it. So, it was pretty tough go for Thamer in that room.
Yeah, like I said, for me in that situation, even if I'm fully telling the truth, I feel like I would have misstepped a couple times just off of pure nerves, especially with everything he's been through. It amazed me how calm and collected he was throughout the whole thing. It attests to his professionalism and his expertise within microbiology itself, but just in general, his poise in those situations is pretty astounding. But so that moment had finished off. You guys bring Thamer back. In your mind, what's running through it after having that conversation with Thamer, after evaluating, from head to toe about everything, whether it was, his knowledge on microbiology itself, who Thamer actually was? The man you've been chasing for years, you now had a conversation with in person. So how did that feel? What was going through your head?
I felt the sense of, okay, we got a good proffer here, because I had a conversation with Dustin, who was our microbiologist, and we felt comfortable that we had the information that we needed to go back to D.C. To convince them that we needed to conduct a longer debrief to really get this information that we needed. I felt he was the person that we definitely needed to have come with us. So I was confident, and I felt good about that part. What I was apprehensive about was, okay, how long is this going to take?
Yeah.
And when would we ever connect again? Because I knew we had to go back to Washington and make the case. And was he going to stay alive? Was he going to go back into hiding again? What could happen in the meantime that could break that connection that we just had established? So that was my main concern.
And then you bring it back to Washington. Quickly, you're trying to operate this case to be able to bring Thamer back and be able to have him in the U.S. And you're obviously facing a lot of hurdles right away, as what is expected with this whole situation. So can you speak to that as well? What were some of those initial hurdles? And also, like you said, you're going against a timeline here, which you don't know if you have days, weeks, months, years. You don't know how long time you have. So what was the feeling in that moment as well?
So we went back to D.C. and, we quickly had another meeting on the Security Council, and we basically laid out, here, this is the proffer. And there was still a lot of hemming and hawing, because I don't know if people like, you found him? So that just kept going on and on. And again, it wound up being for the same reasons that we had initially talked about. They just didn't want us to have that kind of access. But now they were faced with the fact that we did give him this proffer. He did have this information. It was important to us. So it was pretty difficult for them to, come back and say no after what we had done. So eventually they relented, but they gave me strict instructions, and that was, okay, you can go get him, 30 days, get the information you have, ship him back to Iraq. So that was it.
30 days too, because you highlighted that in the book, but that was just not enough time.
No, it's not enough time. But that was what we got, and so we were at the point where we'll take whatever, right? We're not going to sit there and let this thing go on and on and on while we're trying to, gain more time with him. So we said we'll take the 30 days and then we'll see what happens after that. So let's just do this, because it was important we get this information. So that's what we did. So we took the 30 days, went back and exfiltrated him out of Iraq and brought him to the U.S.
Let's speak about that situation a little bit, because again, the story is crazy, being able to have to get him out. And again, people would think that it's as simple as, we're going to get him, same type of drop off that we did before. We'll have our own plane, put him on the plane, bring him right back to the U.S., easy go. That's not what happened at all.
No, that's not what happened at all. So when we were given permission to go back and actually bring him out of Iraq, one of the things I needed was a visa, because regardless of whatever, you need a visa, you need documentation to enter the country. So I had gone to see the DHS counterpart that was at the embassy in Baghdad, and gave him that assignment. Hey, you need to get a visa for us. So I hadn't heard back from him, so I was getting a little bit concerned because the time was ticking. So I finally called him up, and I made arrangements to go to the Green Zone to meet him. And I could tell right off the bat when I met him that it wasn't going to go our way. He said no visa. And, I was just livid at that point. I'm like, he's being brought to the U.S. on our behalf, on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security. What do you mean no visa? How could that happen? He said the local consular office makes the call, and he made the call that no visa. And I never got an explanation as to why. It was just, that was it. And so we were stuck at that point. So we had to come up with
another coincidence.
Yeah, plan B, right?
Another coincidence of something weird happened in the background there.
Yeah. So we had to come up with a new plan to get him out. And then, of course, I had earlier asked if we could manifest him on a military plane. And my contacts assured me that, yeah, we can make that happen. But then I got a call later on that said, we're rescinding that cooperation because, he's got this warrant for his arrest. It's not going to look good putting him on a military plane and getting him out of Iraq, especially when we're there now trying to establish the rule of law in Iraq. We've got Justice Department attorneys trying to help them, fix their system, and here we are smuggling out somebody that they want. So they rescinded that offer. So no military planes. So we had to come up with a Plan C, right?
Yep. And that Plan C in itself was, to say a gamble would be an understatement. But essentially, you were lucky enough to have Jim, I believe, correct?
Jim, right.
He put together a quick plan to be able to smuggle him out under a new airline agency that was trying to cash in on the contractor business because, as we were speaking about, it was getting so difficult to get in and out of Iraq. And there was an opportunity there to be able to get them off base via that way. However, there's some challenges. So do you want to highlight how that plan came to fruition?
That was, Jim, we were struggling back and forth. How are we going to, can't take them to the airport and put them on a regular plane. That's just not going to happen. The military's not going to do it. So I went to our friends at the agency and said, hey, can you help us? Because they owned half the airport and they've got aircraft. And they said, no, we're up to our next fight in insurgency. So you guys are kind of on your own, going to have to deal with this. So Jim found this and came across this airlines called Griffin Air that was taking advantage of the contractor business, and because thousands of contractors in there. So they were flying people in and out. So that was our chance. We said we can just get them all on that plane. We can get them to Kuwait, and then we can take it from there. So that became our plan.
A quick sidetrack on this too. We forgot to mention this, but this is one of my favorite parts. Going in for the second time in Iraq, you were lucky enough to get booked in the 5-star hotel.
Oh,
courtesy of one of your teammates there. So, want to tell that situation?
Yeah, that was there were a few funny things that happened along the way, and that was one of them. So when we were going back in this time to actually get Thamer out, Kevin had apparently. I didn't know about it, but apparently he had sent a message ahead of time saying we've got important government officials coming in. We need the assistance of the military, and I didn't know that this had happened. So when we get there, we're on the tarmac. I see these vehicles coming towards us, and they stop, and this major gets out. I recognize his insignia, and he said, welcome, sir. We have everything ready for you. And I'm like, I'm looking around. Is he talking to me? And I was the important government official. And, so they had booked me into the Najaf suite and they had done all this stuff. So, and I said to Kevin, I said, what the heck's going on? He said, oh, just go with it. We're fine. So later when we get booked in to our lodging, I went to his room and I said, WTF, man, what's going on? And that's when he laid it out. And I said, are you kidding me? So for the next, several days, I played the part of an unknown government official on an unknown mission, but yeah, that was kind of but it worked out well because the accommodations were rather nice. Yeah. It's better than sleeping in a tent, which we had to do the first time around. So, but that was Kevin. Yeah.
Funny part about it too. I mean, again, it shows how much bureaucracy is in all these situations that, you come in, I'm a high level government official. They're like, all right, let's set them up.
Yeah, there you go. So, you want to, the military wants to do the right thing. And they were very helpful. It was nice to be able to work out of there instead of sleeping in tents again, which I think was Kevin's goal.
Smart goal, honestly.
So, but we had a few choice words because I was like, I don't need this aggravation. I'm going to get in trouble. And he's like, don't worry about it. We're good. And then he's like, well, what do you want to do now? You want to tell him it's all fake? That this whole story is, So I said, no, let it go, and we'll just get through it. So we did.
Those are the type of stories where in the moment you're like, this is the worst decision we ever made. And then once it all works out, you're like, that's great story. We're happy we did that. But so from there, you end up having to sneak Thamer onto this plane. And one of the biggest trials that you had to deal with there was the fact that he didn't have his visa, that you had to basically smuggle him in through this different asset, which is basically usually utilized for criminals, bringing them over to the U.S. to stand trial. So do you want to speak to that? And then also why there was such a problem in terms of using that to get him onto the plane, Griffin Airlines eventually fly him over?
Right. So when the visa didn't work for us, we came up with another aspect to get him into the country because we had to have documentation. So it was called a significant public benefit parole, and it's a system that we have that would allow us to bring people into the country that would not qualify for a visa. Say, for example, you needed to bring in a drug cartel member. He wouldn't get a normal visa, but he needed to testify at a trial for us. So we would use that significant public benefit parole process to do that. Thamer didn't actually fit in that. He fit in the sense that he couldn't get the visa, but it's normally used for those types of scenarios, not one like this. But that was basically the only avenue available to us. And Kevin, thank God, being an HSI agent, he was the point person on being able to make connections to allow that to happen. And that took some time to get the approval for that, because again, it's normally made by DOJ lawyers, that needed somebody to come in the country to testify. So using it for this purposes was a little bit different.
And now you're walking them up to the airline, and one of the things that the airline has to do is just check paperwork, making sure who's coming out and who's coming in is who they say they are. And, obviously, as we highlighted, there's a lot of risk that comes to letting the wrong person out of the country. But in the moment, you guys realized that you had an opportunity to sneak Thamer on. You were able to sneak him on, and then eventually, the ruse worked. You were able to not have to really show the paperwork you might have needed to. So can you speak to that moment as well, and then also how much that was, as we've said, an oh shit moment?
Yeah, so we get there, and it's in the evenings, it's dark, and we get in line because a lot of contractors trying to get out on that next plane. That was what we were trying to do. So, we were in line with everybody else, and we could see the one person up there at Griffin Airlines, and he's examining everybody's paperwork and going through it and making sure it's okay. And it was taking a long time. It was slow, and that just built up more anxiety. We're going to get up there, and he's going to say, no, this person doesn't have the right paperwork. And so now here we are with a foreigner who we didn't actually have permission to be on base, and he can't get on the plane. So now what do we do? So, so it was a little bit of a shit moment. We're hoping that we wallpapered him with enough documentation with the SBBP and everything else that we could get him on that plane. But it was touch and go. And then the guy took a break, and he walked outside, and everybody in the line was still waiting. And thank God Kevin took that moment as, hey, let's see what we can do to help our cause here. So he stepped outside. I was still waiting in line, and he went out to meet this Griffin rep. And I could see them talking, and then eventually he motioned for me to come over. So he whispered in my ear, he said, you have your badge? And I said, my Secret Service badge? I said, yeah, I have it. We carry retired credentials with us. And I said, it doesn't do any good. I'm retired, it doesn't have any authority. He said, just take it out. And so he was talking to the Griff rep, and I knew what he was trying to do at that point. So I took my badge out and I put my thumb over where it said retired, and I just held it up like that. And Kevin had basically greased the wheels. Said, hey, we've got this important guy on the plane. He's got to get on there. This is coming all the way from D.C. The Secret Service is involved. We've got to just do this. So that was the line. And thank God that the Griffin rep said, yeah, okay, I get it. And so that little Secret Service thing, it always carries weight, right? The name. So I think it helped just get us over that hump.
Yeah, grease the wheels a bit.
Grease the wheels a bit. That because I don't think the guy wanted to ruffle our feathers, but we were concerned with him, perhaps calling base security and saying, well, let's just double check on everybody's paperwork and everybody's credentials and all this. And of course, we were worried about that because if base security came in and they realized that there was a warrant or that we didn't have full authorization to have him on the base, that might be the end of it. But luckily, that didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, that moment was just the whole time you're just sitting on your seat and you're like, oh my God. And then the way you put it too is that it seemed like the guy was excited to be a part of it too. He was like,
yeah, he did. Once we convinced him that this was really vital and this mission needed to happen, he kind of got into it a little bit. So that worked out in our favor.
So we get Thamer to the U.S. and the interview process begins. You end up going down to Miami, again, running into some hurdles as well, which is as would be expected in this situation. But you end up picking a safe house. I guess before getting into it, I'm curious to get your own perspective here is like, what would be some of the things you would look for in a safe house in a situation like that?
Well, safe houses are used where you either need to, bring someone in to have a conversation with them, to debrief them, or you might have a safe house where you need to stash an asset for a period of time, someone who might be, waiting for court or some type of judicial action. So they're used for a variety of purposes. It could be surveillance. It could be a whole bunch of different things. So, but a safe house is a place that would not arouse any suspicion. would just be someplace in a normal neighborhood where people are coming and going, and there's nothing unusual about it. And you would use that location to, to do whatever you needed to do. And I mentioned a couple of reasons why you would use a safe house. So that was what our plan was. But when I had contacted my brethren in the FBI, and they realized how long that we would need it for, they became concerned about that it would get burned, to be too much activity for too long a period of time, people coming and going, and it would render that safe house unsafe. So they kind of pulled that back, and we were kind of back to square one with finding a location to conduct this debriefing.
You guys ended up finding a location.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
being able to find a situation where you could be able to hide this high value asset at the same time, hide it in plain sight. Can you speak to the location a little bit?
Yeah, it was interesting. So, of course, it was Miami, right? So Miami is a very international place, international city. You can come and go. Wouldn't arouse suspicions. It had some of all the assets that we would need and so forth. So all that worked, but I wasn't expecting, or I wasn't aware of the cultural issues that we would run into in bringing, a Muslim into, South Beach. So that was a whole another issue that we had to kind of deal with. But that turned out to be kind of humorous, and Thamer was pretty cool with all of that. But it hadn't dawned on me, the cultural part of it.
I can't imagine, if I've been in the Middle East my whole life, his dream was always to come to the U.S. One of the first places you go is South Beach.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. It's like, I hope he doesn't think that we all act like this, But he was pretty cool with it, and so we were able to, to get to that safe location and then conduct that all-important debrief.
So getting into the debrief, obviously there was a lot of highly technical questions, and I think it's probably time to kind of circle back to the very beginning and the reason why his expertise was so critical. So can you speak to what was happening at the U.S. in terms of biological attacks at that time and why it coincided with Thamer's expertise at such a critical level?
Sure. So after 9/11, we had unfortunately been hit with the largest biological attack in U.S. history, which was the anthrax attacks. So we were very concerned. We didn't know if it was a part of the 9/11 scenario, if it was something separate, if it was sponsored by a government, if it was rogue. So we had no idea. So it was very concerning because someone in the country had learned to weaponize anthrax effectively. And we had no idea who it was, when they would strike again, what other capabilities could they have, could they unleash other bioagents. So at the time, all of that was still going on, and it turned into be the Amerithrax investigation, which was one of the largest ever conducted in our nation's history. And so our role in that was to understand how anthrax could be produced in a I guess you could say, custodial scientific manner, like in a low-level production manner. Like, for example, how could two terrorists cook up anthrax in an apartment in Hoboken? What would be the telltale signs? What would be the things that they would need? How would they go about weaponizing it in the way they did outside of a laboratory? Because we had someone, again, running around the United States doing that, and it was a big, big issue for us.
Well, there's a worry that, so in the U.S., did we not necessarily have the same expertise that Thamer provided, or was it more so just getting the perspective of his from being in the Middle East and also, not saying having relationships with these different terrorist groups, but just being in that region and kind of understanding the dynamic and the thought process that might be for a lot of these groups?
Sure. So, anthrax, is a naturally occurring disease. And so do we have people in the country that can do in a laboratory what we were concerned with, which is to weaponize it? Yes. But what we were concerned with is we had people in the country running around who might have figured out how to do it in a way that we weren't aware of. And that was very concerning to us because, again, although we were dealing with anthrax, we were concerned with other types of biological agents like tularemia, any of the hemorrhagic fevers, any of those types of things. So it was a much broader concern for us, although we were dealing with anthrax here. So we were very concerned with being able to understand low-level production techniques. How could somebody do it underneath the radar, in which we would not know about it? What would be the telltale signatures? In other words, like when a bomb goes off, we analyze that bomb. We look for how it was made, how it was wired. Those are what we call the signatures that help us hopefully to identify who's responsible. So we were worried about, okay, what were the signatures for making anthrax, weaponizing it and taking it and turning it into a weapon, which is basically to make it easy to disperse and difficult to detect. So that was on our minds, and Thamer was going to be the key to helping us with that.
And what were the worries about this colliding with the WMD fiasco? Because WMDs, like we said, had become, at one point, were the mainstay of conversation. This is why we're going to war. Then quickly, the intelligence community, Washington itself, had to back off of that. Now we're facing anthrax in itself, which is a bioweapon and could be utilized by terrorist groups. Suddenly, we're right back in that conversation. So what was the worry there as well?
Well, again, as I mentioned, it was the largest investigation, one of the largest that we had conducted in the country, and we still didn't know who did it, and we still didn't have all the details that we wanted. So that was a huge concern, because we were waiting any day now. We could get hit again. And this time from something like anthrax, fortunately, is not a contagious disease. You can die from anthrax inhalation of the spores, but you can't pass it from one person to another. So that was somewhat of a saving grace, but we were worried that this person's going to hit us with something that is contagious. And of course, if you fast forward to COVID, you could see what happened there. A bioagent or a virus could spread so quickly around the entire world and do so much devastation. We were worried about that all those years ago as part of our program. And so, there was just a lot of consternation, and we just were not prepared for any type of bio attack. If you remember, it took the country by surprise, and people were concerned. They had shut down mail facilities. People were concerned about opening up mail. We didn't know, so all of that it kind of created a fear. So we already had 9/11. Now we got a fear on top of that of being attacked, with bioagents. So that really was, just kind of, brought us all together to say, hey, we need to really think about our capabilities and find a way to get all the information that we can to protect ourselves. And Thamer was part of that.
So speaking of this debrief as well, we highlighted the first one where it was this level of worry and the unknown that Thamer was facing, because as we said, the first one went very bad for him, and then circumstantially he has to walk into a new situation with promises, with possibility of promises being broken, whatever it might be. Yet again, Thamer really handled the situation in a method with such poise. It was, again, amazing to hear. So can you speak on that debrief as well, and how the information he was able to provide, the poise that he showed, really kind of got the ball rolling in terms of the conclusion that we end up seeing?
Sure. So, we had brought in a lot of technical experts that came and went from different agencies to sit down as part of this debrief and find out. And of course, the technical information that Thamer told us is contained in a classified report, and I can't discuss that. But he
I probably wouldn't understand it right away.
Well, there you go too. That was a big part of it too. Is it was highly technical. So, but that's contained in a classified report that I cannot discuss. But Thamer, again, did all of this with no guarantees that anything would work out for him, because there was nothing in writing, and I was given direction that after we got through debriefing him and got this information, I was to take him back to Iraq, which in my estimation was a death sentence. So that created a whole bunch of different dynamics with us. Now, the old adage is you never personalize a case, right? Because you can get in some serious trouble. But it started to become a personal issue. In my mind, I was thinking, this is just not right. We just don't do this to people. He's risking his life, coming here, giving us information, working with us, and our payment to him is just a one-way ticket back to Iraq. So that created, a bunch of problems and issues for us and concern. And of course, all during this time, I got to know Thamer more and found out more about his background and what had happened to him. We had a mission, and I had my orders, but it wasn't sitting too well with any of us, not just me, but any of the folks on the team, that we had to get him back to Iraq at the end of 30 days.
And how did you approach that moving forward?
Well, I was kind of caught up in it because it was, I didn't want to, say to him, hey, listen, regardless of your level of cooperation, you're going back to Iraq, because I didn't want to discourage his cooperation. I mean, I could only imagine saying that to him and what his thoughts would be.
Yeah.
Like, why am I here then if you're going to ship me back? So I didn't want to discourage his cooperation. On the same token, I wasn't happy with, keeping that totally from him, so it was a little bit of a
the heartbreak
dilemma for me. Yeah, because, and of course the clock was ticking down. We get closer to that 30 days, and I brought up my concerns with my boss, Maureen McCarthy, and she was up in Washington, and we were doing everything she could to kind of fight to overturn that original order to bring him back.
And evidently, we were able to keep Thamer in the U.S. So do you want to speak to that a little bit, the fight that it took to get there, and then also eventually what that meant to him?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we were getting close to the 30-day limit, and we had pretty much finished the bulk of the debrief, and things were being put together. And actually, it was months later before we finally finalized all that information. But at the time, we started to do that. And I was making plans to send him back to Iraq. I didn't want to do it, but again, that's where we were. And I have to say that he was ever the gentleman. He never complained and never said to me, hey, why, you guys owe me or anything like that. He never had any of that attitude at all. He basically, would say, I know you're doing everything that you can, and I always I kind of always held on to that, and that kind of got me through in terms of understanding, where he was coming from and the way he was approaching things. And that made me even fight harder to try to keep him in here, keep him in the United States. So that went on, and then as we got closer, we were just down to a few days, I got a call from Washington. And it was Dr. McCarthy that said, yeah, we got the okay to keep him in the country. And that was a big relief because, again, I was worried about his safety when we got him back to Iraq. So that was a big relief, and he was certainly happy to see that we overcame that particular hurdle.
I can't imagine the feeling in that moment, too, for him, because, and people will see this when they read the book, but, early on there were promises, and then they were broken, and then there was maybe not promises, but somewhat guarantees or possibilities, and then they were broken. It was just this cycle. And for somebody, around the world, even now, obviously, this is something that so many people dream of, coming to the U.S., but an Iraqi in a war-torn country at that time, to be able to come to the U.S. was an opportunity like no other. So, for him, it was going through this constant heartbreak and feeling, the world had left him behind, and then suddenly, he's able to come to the U.S. and live the American dream. What did that moment feel like for you, knowing that he was coming?
For me personally, it felt like, okay, thank God somebody in Washington's got, some compassion, some common sense, and so I was happy for that we finally reached the right person. I don't know all the details behind that because I was in Florida with Thamer, and Dr. McCarthy was in D.C., but she got to the right people. So I was happy that happened, and certainly he was as well. And I remember specifically going down to his room to tell him that, that we got the okay to keep him in the country, and that was a big relief, for him. And I think for the first time he thought, okay, maybe they'll keep their promise and we'll go forward and and not ship me back. So, but throughout this entire time, he never complained. He never said, you owe me, and he never brought up all the bad things that had happened to him and all of that stuff. He was ever the gentleman, and that made me even want to fight harder to make sure that we, we didn't have to send him back.
Yeah, like I said, the poise throughout the whole situation was just phenomenal. I mean, for me, like I would have cracked under the first one. It's crazy what he was able to maintain throughout that whole situation. But I think the best way to kind of bring everything to a conclusion here is you went on this wild goose chase for years, and you were there when the war on terrorism in itself was started. Many people would say 9/11, that was that moment where America changed forever. And you had this feeling of how you felt for wanting revenge and going over there and really, we wanted to get back what was taken from us. But through those years spent looking for this Iraqi and building this relationship, there was a perspective shift and a way of viewing the people of Iraq, the war itself, who America is, and how we want to represent ourselves. So can you speak to that as well?
Yes. As I mentioned, I was angry at the beginning of all of this, and I felt that anger throughout most of this mission. And then things started to change for me when I started to learn more about Thamer and all the things that he had gone through. And I just kind of had started to, a different perspective on this whole thing with the war in Iraq. And, I learned from him, the suffering of innocent Iraqi people, and we don't often take that into consideration. When you hear directly from a person who had to go through it, you realize, God, I can only imagine bombs dropping where I live, in our country. I can only imagine having to go on the run in your own country. I can only imagine, worrying about food and clean water and medical care and whether or not, the next bomb is going to come and wipe me and my family out. So all of those things just started to kind of weigh on me, and I started looking at things a little bit different. And at the end of this, I decided to write this because I wanted people to have a different perspective of, what an Iraqi, an innocent Iraqi, had to go through, because we don't hear that often. And then when you look at it, the estimate is about almost 500,000 Iraqis died as a result of a war that didn't need to happen. We lost over 4,000 coalition forces, tens of thousands wounded. Iraqi families wiped out, and they have to live with all of this. So, what was our role in it? Did we do the right thing? I have my doubts about that. I sincerely believe that it was a war that didn't have to happen. There was a lot of death and destruction that took place. And so, my thoughts definitely changed about that. And, I realized, how wrong it was for me to have hatred toward a person I'd never even met, or have hatred towards a country and their people, and so my whole perspective changed, and so I decided, well, I need to tell this story and let people have these questions, and then maybe come up with their own answers. So we decided to write the book, and here we are.
Steven, I don't think there's a better way to end it than with that. I mean, like I said, the book's fantastic. I think you tell the story from start to finish in such a perfect way. But not only that, is that kind of, not to say character arc, but the ideas, the perspective that shifts throughout the whole story is something that me as a reader, and I feel anyone else that would read this can say, we're along for that ride too. And I think putting a book out there with that intention of telling the story of the people that often don't get their story told is critical. So, I obviously can't do the justice of thanking you on behalf of them, but for me at least, I want to thank you for telling the story, for being able to put yourself out there for that, and looking for a way to not just tell your story, but the story of the Iraqi people as well, and bringing something so profound to life and being able to let my listeners and everything see it today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on the show and giving me a chance to tell the story. So
absolutely. Anything else that you want to plug or let people know about?
No, obviously, the book is for sale at and Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the places, and and I have a website, StevenPhilipMonteiro.com. And you can Google it and get all the information you need and find ways and where it's sold. So it's sold in a lot of different venues. So, so hopefully your readers will want to your listeners want to follow up on this and read the book. So thank you for affording me the opportunity.
Absolutely. No, they absolutely will. As you guys saw in the beginning, make sure to go buy it. Link's always below. The cover that you signed at the beginning of this episode, I'll be showing as well.
Okay,
so
great.
We're doing a little bit in the future here, but it'll work for it.
Okay.
But again, Steven, thank you for coming on today, and we'll have to absolutely do another episode down the road.
Sounds great.